Happy Thursday again. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I'm Katie, joined by Chris and John. Today we're talking about solutions in search of problems, which in some ways is kind of the basis of So What. It's how it came about. It's why I, say the phrase so often is, whether it's from Chris or anyone else, my first question is, so what? What problem is this thing solving? So today we're talking about that exact topic. Solutions in search of problems. So today we will talk about how to deal with solutions or products developed without customer input, which happens a lot. How to pivot an existing solution to a real problem with market research, and live development example of a problem for an existing solution. So it reminds me when I worked at a different company, they created an innovation committee. And so this innovation committee was meant to come up with new product ideas or new research ideas that we could turn into grants or that we could turn into commercial products. And what was lacking was that customer input. So I feel like sometimes innovation is just a mask for solutions in search of problems, rather than innovation being new ways to solve existing problems. What do you guys think?
It's just so funny to have that creativity as a committee is always a risky venture,
And I should note, we never came up with a single idea.
Okay.
That's fair. Yeah. No, I mean, it depends on what the source of the innovation is too. Like when the topic we're talking about today came out of some code that I wrote using Twitter's API, and the reason it exists is because I was like, hey, I want to play with this thing because fundamentally I'm still 12, right? And I just want to play with toys all day. And started making things, and to the best of my knowledge, looking at what's possible in the API, what kinds of data you get out of it, what kinds of computations you can make, that created this sort of thing that then I was like, cool, it exists. I don't know what to do with
it. Well, and I feel like that's a very common thing that happens is, I don't know, it would be cool if it could do this, but there's no real problem that the thing is solving. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of really great innovations and inventions come from just sort of playing around with stuff. But a lot of times, especially when your team has limited resources, limited budget, trying to create solutions in search of a problem is the last thing you need to be doing. Another really good example of this is, setting your strategic priorities for the year. You're creating solutions, but you don't actually understand what the problem is. And so you might have this disconnect where you have the, big thinkers and the business leaders and the thought leaders, and they're coming up with these, goals and ideas. And there's such a disconnect from what's actually happening that they're creating solutions, but it's not solving the actual problem. They want to create this new, innovative, technological, widgety doodah platform, but everybody's saying like, hey, I can't even get to work on time because traffic is bad. So like, how is this thing going to solve the problem of people actually being able to get to work? So with that, Chris, what journey are we going on today?
Well, I thought we'd take a look at what the thing is and then get your feedback. And for the folks who are watching, please leave comments in the comments, wherever it is on whichever channel watching it, with your reactions. Like when you see this, go, wow, that's useless, or I could see some features of that. And then once we take a look at this thing and sort of explore ourselves, we'll look at some of the feedback we've gotten from folks we showed it to, because our first instinct after creating this thing was, okay, well, what do other people see in this that maybe we're not? So it's doing things in the wrong order. The market research should have come first. But as is typical with coding projects that I do as hobby projects, you create the thing and they're like, okay, now what? So let's go ahead and flip to this thing. So ultimately, all this is pulling data from Twitter's API about a username or whatever, and then trying to do some analysis to see what's happening. So this is the first of 3 screens. This is for the Trust Insights Twitter account, which, by the way, if you don't follow us, go to twitter.com/trustinsights. You can follow us there. And then maybe someday you'll be on here. These are the words and phrases that occur the most in our followers' bios. So when the other people who follow us, these are the things that occur the most frequently. So social media, digital marketing, co-founder, content marketing, digital marketer, data science, and so on and so forth. So this is, the first thing. So when you see this, John and Katie, what's your reaction to this thing?
My initial reaction is this is an audience analysis. And so what we're doing is we're looking at our audience makeup, who makes up our audience, and are we attracting the right kinds of people to consume our content that we're sharing? And so that's the way that I would look at this. Now, my follow-up question would be like, well, if we have the wrong mix, and on this analysis, it looks like we have a healthy mix of the right people, but if we had the wrong mix, like what would we do about it? How do we find those people who are the right mix? So that's two different questions.
Yeah, that is a great point. Like you would love to see CMO on this list as a follower. Of course, the numbers aren't there for it. And I'm just surprised that social media dominates so much. I mean, it's almost 2-to-1 over even just the next closest line. So that was very interesting to see that, that's such a big slice of what we do. But at least, digital marketing is strong, and data science. Actually, data science is stronger than I thought it would be for coming up on there. But yeah, okay, so now what do we do?
Yep. One of the things this doesn't have, and it would need different coding to do it, would be to explain, at least a hint at a little bit of the context, because that first one could very well be views I express on social media are my own, right? So it's not saying that person's a social media professional. That might be part of their disclaimer in their bios.
That's interesting. So the context with anything, context is important. And so, looking at that again, we don't know, are these social media professionals or are they saying those kinds of phrases? Co-founders, great. Co-founders of what? Co-founders of the right kinds of company. Data science. It could be, this is a stretch. It could be, I don't believe in data science. And just, as an example. But to your point, Chris, we don't have that context because these aren't the full bios. These are just the most frequent phrases.
That's right. Now, in aggregate, though, I would agree with you that it says, okay, that you've at least got an audience that has some topical relevance. So that's number one. Number two that we came out of this thing was, who does the Trust Insights account interact with? Interactions is the sum of replies, retweets, and mentions. So you add those three things up. Who does this account talk to or interact with or retweet the most? Logically, it's the company's account. So you and I, are interacting with the company account the most, followed by Ginny Dietrich Spin Sucks, our friends over at Talkwalker, Inside Big Data, Harvard Business School, and then on down the list.
So, yeah, I guess it's that. So what? Like, okay, that's good to know that. So, I look at this, and if Chris, you and I were not at the top of the list, then the answer there would be like, okay, we need to interact with our own content a little bit more. But otherwise, I don't know what I would do with this information.
John?
How long is what's the time series on this?
So the window of time on this is the last 5,000 tweets. So it's in our account, it's effectively forever because we haven't tweeted 5,000 times yet on our own account yet. But you could restrict this down if you had to by time.
So then, in search of a problem, is this the type of report that I could use to say, oh, it looks like John J. Wall interacts with my account a heck of a lot. But as an example, we do follow you, John. But if we didn't, we'd be like, oh, we should probably go see what his profile is all about, follow him. And then if he has the type of audience that we want, we can try to engage him a little bit more. Is that what you were thinking in terms of how to use this kind of data?
That was one possibility. The other possibility that I always think about with influencers in particular is if you have somebody who's, a big influencer, let's say the Trust Insight account was unreachable influencer. Well, who are the people that they interact with? Because maybe I can't afford to or can't break through to the influencer, but maybe I can interact with the account, the accounts that are 3, 4, 5, 6 on the list here, and say maybe if I can get on their radar, I can get my stuff to bubble up to the big influencer whose attention otherwise I'm probably not going to get.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So it'd be more of a targeting tool there. You'd go there and put the accounts that you want to get into, and now you'd be able to work the cloud around them.
Exactly. Okay. And number 3 is when we look at the followers, the people who follow the Trust Insights account, here's the last time that they tweeted. So 417 of them tweeted today, right? So they published something on Twitter today. 171 published something at least a day ago. 78 published something at least 2 days ago. And then you go all the way down to the bottom, and there's 653 accounts that follow us that have not published anything on Twitter in at least a month. So that's sort of the either at the very least is got lurkers, right? But they might also just not be active accounts.
Mm-hmm. So my first gut instinct to this report was, I don't see how this is useful because it doesn't tell you who. But if you think about it in that context of influencer marketing, if you're potentially vetting influencers for your brand or your campaign or whatever it is, I could see how this would be useful, because when we talk about the different kinds of influencers, if you have someone, the example, Chris, I think you used is like a Kardashian, if they're just screaming into the void, then how useful is that if their audience isn't necessarily engaged versus someone who might have a lower number of followers, but their followers are super engaged with everything that they're doing?
Yeah, when we shared these with the Marketing Over Coffee listeners, because you had run this for 4 people there, and everybody was just blown away by that 31 plus days old. And it was interesting to see how some accounts, it was still huge. It was maybe a third of their total followers, but other accounts, it could be well over 60, 70% of their followers. So there's a lot of junk. I think there's a bunch of stuff to explore there. Like, it would be really interesting, like you said, grab a Kardashian or somebody like, Chris Brogan, people in the hundreds of thousands of followers range, and see what those numbers look like. Are you able to pull beyond 31 days? How far back can it go?
Oh yeah. I mean, you get the actual timestamps. It's just in order to make this chart readable and not like this long.
Right.
I basically bucketed everything after 31 days.
Mm-hmm. So Chris, what were you thinking? What was your train of thought when you were putting these charts together, other than, I wonder what that data looks like?
That's exactly it. So that's hence solution in search of a problem. It wasn't necessarily solving a problem so much as exploring what's in here. And this is obviously something that you can do with any kind of data. Like, so this is something that, for example, the logic and the pieces of things, you could take this and use your CRM data, right? And see when was the last time any of our prospects have been active. We've tracked something activity in the CRM. If 90% of your prospects have no activity, it's like, you may on paper have a lot of pipeline, but if they're not interacting with you, is that pipeline toast?
I think back to your point though, Chris, it's all contextual. And so, we do have one comment that I think is actually interesting. So Peter Knight is saying, I have a Twitter account just for reading stuff, never post anything. And I think a lot of people use Twitter as a news feed. And so, maybe awareness is good, but engagement is low. And so, I think it depends on the purpose of your Twitter account, what you're trying to accomplish. And so if you're just sharing news and information, maybe the lack of engagement is okay because people are seeing the stuff, but they're not actually doing anything. Or, I guess I can kind of understand where having a really good purpose for the Twitter account is probably important for this kind of analysis.
Right. And so the flip side of that would be your attribution analysis to say, okay, of the stuff that, all the channels are out there on, even if someone like Peter never tweets, never posts anything, never likes anything, never favorites, never retweets, even they're just reading, if they're clicking on our stuff and going to our website, we should be able to see at least the traffic generated from that. So that would be a case where, like you said, you want to have that parallel context. Yes, we have an active group of people here, and then for the lurkers, we may not know it's the same person, but if you see that you have got a big dormant chunk of followers from an activity perspective here, and you look in your attribution analysis and you're getting no traffic from Twitter, then you've probably got a problem.
See, that makes sense. And that's not data that's being shown here. So you need that secondary data source in order to understand, is this okay?
Exactly. So this is sort of the process that I went through initially when we were creating these things, and it was still very much up, going in search of a problem. So the next thing that we did was we asked the folks in Analytics for Marketers and a couple other friends, what's your feedback when you see this stuff? What do you see? What are the things that come to mind? Arshan was asking, hey, could we slice and dice the bios over time to see for the people who are following you, is there a change in the words of the people that are following you? So maybe social media was really popular in bios from, say, 2 years ago, but in the last 90 days, more people with TikTok were, like I'm a TikTok influencer, whatever, is showing up in your bio. So it'd be a way to detect relatively new trends based on the people who are following you. Brian said, can you then see who they interact with to sort of create a network map? And the answer to that is yes, you can. It would make the software, gigantic in terms of the amount of data it would have to pull in, but it is a doable thing to at least look. You also do get, when you address the API, you get the last tweet that somebody made. So you can also just do a quick summary of all the people who follow you. What is the general topics of this cohort from their last tweet? Let's see, going down here. Christoph says these might be useful in identifying who might have been behind an anonymous Twitter account to see who the account interacts with. Kathy McPhillips is saying cross-referencing with bios and recency of activity to see can we identify those topics and discussion points and then do some outreach to them. And saying, is there a way to identify which of these accounts might be bots, not just inactive, but just outright bots? There's actually separate software for that. There's a library called Bot or Not that looks at essentially patterns, things like stuff as silly as your profile picture, the things you've retweeted or shared recently, the timing, like is your account sharing on such a regular schedule that it's always exactly the same time every day, as looking for automation. And then we asked for a couple of our friends who do influencer marketing, and I thought it was very interesting. So one person said, I've never seen that sort of inactive audience pool before in any other tool. It's kind of new, but it might be a good way to judge influencer fraud. If an influencer is saying, I've got 1 million followers, like, yeah, and 20 interact with you, like 99% are in that 31 days post. Again, to Peter's point, some percentage of them are going to be lurkers, right? But not like 90% of them.
So I guess I'm still struggling with a very clear use case for this software. Like, I feel like it's still a solution in search of a problem, and we're searching pretty hard to find a problem that it solves. I think what we've been able to come up with so far is that it could potentially be a useful tool specifically for those who are doing influencer marketing. But beyond that, it probably doesn't have a lot of utility. It sounds like we could maybe stretch and think about how to use it for building community, coming up with content ideas. But even that feels like there's better ways to do that. Am I on or off track?
Well, so I would say this is the point where someone with product marketing experience would take this feedback that we've gotten and the capabilities we have now, and sort of the wish list of things that we might be able to do, and say, okay, well, is there a way? This is that whole pivot into something new. We've got ingredients, we've got some tools. We've got talent. What we don't have is a recipe and an outcome. So the question I would pose to you, Katie, as someone who's done a lot of product management, is, given these raw materials, how would you turn this into a coherent product that someone like John could then go sell?
the first thing I would do is a little bit more research. So I would take this and sort of put it aside for a minute, and I would start asking those communities, what are some of the challenges you have with influencer marketing in terms of getting good data? What tools are you currently using? So we could at least start to understand who the players are out there, the potential competitors for the thing that we're creating. Because one of the things that we would want to do, just like everyone else, is why is ours better? Why should you use ours instead of what's already out there? And one of the things that I know we lack a lot of times is any kind of an interface. And so that right there already kind of puts us at a disadvantage. But if our data is, more robust, more timely, more detailed, more intuitive, whatever the thing is, then an interface becomes less important for people who can read a spreadsheet and do something with it. So I would start with doing a little bit more market research to see what are the existing problems to getting any kind of information about the influencers that you're trying to wrangle, and then see if there's any sort of clear matchup with the thing that we've created. But then you also need to package, to your point, we need to sort of package the thing of, here's your problem, here's our approach, here's the output, here's, everybody wins solution kind of a thing. And so you need to put it together that way as well. So that's where I would start with more research.
Okay. And John, what about you in terms of thinking about how, if at all, you could sell something like this? When you think about the conversations you've had with folks around the topics of social media, how does that map to what is here and what might be possible?
Yeah, I mean, the hook is always the pain, right? We've got to find a pain point that this solves. Otherwise, we can show it off, and it's good to show that we have, the facility with which we can chew through data and show somebody results, and so we can get to things. But yeah, without a pain hook, it gets really tough. One thing that did jump out at me, though, it was interesting seeing social media show up in the bios. One thing is scanning bios, keeping a track for keywords. Anybody that's got like marketing ops or performance marketing, some of these terms that have just surfaced in the past couple of years of folks that are usually data hungry. That's an interesting angle, but that's more of a kind of alerts type thing, instead of choosing single accounts, more like, basically you can just search for that kind of stuff. It doesn't need such a huge tool, but that is definitely a point where you'd be, qualifying leads better. You kind of know from your Twitter account who to actually reach out to and get over into the Slack group and things like that.
Gotcha. So you could say, take that extract of those Twitter bios, maybe do what's called seeded LDA analysis, and say, okay, these are the 8 topics that we know we can serve effectively well. Let's look at the bios that exist and bucket our users into those 8 containers, and then another container, and say, okay, these 40 people who are all about Google Analytics, let's make sure they get someone DMs them and gets them into the Slack group first. So is that kind of what you're thinking about?
Yeah, definitely. Because they're, it's people with those titles, we know for sure that they want to hear about what we're talking about, and they're more engaged with the kinds of things we're doing. Because yeah, we see a lot of folks that are, social media experts, but they're not really interested in churning large amounts of data. They're more just content creation people. It's not the same. It's not a right fit as far as lead.
Okay. What do you think about that, Katie? Because I know one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was, if you've got the thing already, maybe the product is about to launch, or maybe the product's already in market, and you don't have the opportunity to start over. How do you pivot while what's the expression? Fixing the plane while you're in flight.
Which is always an excellent idea, by the way. No, I mean that's exactly it. It's sort of what we used to terribly say, or what my engineers used to terribly say, is putting lipstick on a pig. Kind of dress it up and do the best you can with it. And so yeah, I think that John is definitely onto something of like, okay, so we have the thing, in this example, we have somebody who has already signed off on selling it, and we're just saddled with doing something with it. So yeah, you want to start to create a little bit of buzz, and so why not use what we have to our advantage and find out who those people are, see if we can get them on as maybe early adopters. Maybe they can beta test it. Maybe we can get some early testimonials from those people. And so there's definitely ways to use the information in this specific tool. Now, if you're talking about, other tools that have been created with no real use case, I mean, it just really depends on what it is.
Right. Well, we talked earlier this week on the podcast about Google Analytics 4. Google Analytics 4 has been rolled out, and we all, as the end users, don't really get a whole lot of say into what goes into it. We can let folks on Google's team know, hey, this seems to work, this seems to not work, or where'd this thing go, but we don't really have a voice in it. It's just part of the tools that we're given. So again, in that outcome, recipe, ingredients, tools, and talent, we are given the tools. We don't get a choice. So the question then becomes, well, how do we adapt? It's you have to make soup, but you've been given a frying pan.
It's still very unclear to me what Google Analytics 4 is for, as opposed to Google Analytics 3. I mean, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. I know that there's specific reasons. But that's a really good example, because the way that it was rolled out has not been explicitly clear. Here's how you use it. Here's how it maps to the old thing. Here's the problem it's solving that you, the user, have asked us to solve. It's very unclear in that kind of communication.
Now, with the product feedback that we were given so far, could you use this, if this is all you had to work with? Maybe you've gotten some customer feedback from social media or whatever. To what extent could you use this to sort of reverse engineer those problems that we've created solutions for that we didn't maybe identify?
So the way that I would approach that is I would take a look at this feedback and pull out those 3 or 4 use cases that people have listed. And I would try it with different data. So I would take a look at, known top influencers across different industries and see if you sort of get the same kinds of results time after time after time. And so I'd be looking for more of that consistency across one use case. So I would take it one use case at a time and continue to run the data to see, can I get a usable result every single time? And if I can't, what is the percentage that the data is not useful? So is there some sort of like a threshold that has to be this much or these kinds of people? And so it's only this industry where the information is useful. So that's how I would start to back into the use case, is I would basically have to do a lot of product testing to see, does it hold water? Is there anything there? Or was this just an anomaly because we ran it for ourselves and we know what the data should say?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, now we're at essentially the end of this process. So now the question is, Katie, what do you want me to do with this thing? Since it's our solution in search of a problem, what am I supposed to do here?
If you're looking for the absolute honest, doesn't matter that there's a slew of people watching us, I would say that this right now is probably not a high priority, because when I see the feedback that we've gotten so far, I don't see very strong use cases. Like, I see that there's some use cases. I think there's a lot more work that would need to go into it in order to make this a viable product. The second question I would have is, yes, Trust Insights is really good at processing large amounts of data because of the way that we've structured the company, but are we interested in getting into the influencer marketing realm, for example? We typically don't, just maybe sort of the one-off, but is that a service that we want to get into? I don't know the answer to that. The answer is maybe. So I guess I would say for now, what I would ask you to do is, maybe go back to this group of people or branch out, and we can do a little bit more market research to ask them, what are the challenges that you have with your influencer marketing data, so that we could just learn more, because maybe there's a version 2 of the code. Maybe there's other ways to think about it from that information, other than putting the solution in front of them and saying, what would you do with it?
Well, I think then for folks who are subscribed to the Trust Insights newsletter, expect there to be a poll or a survey or something coming to you in the relatively near future, asking that and other questions, because obviously we want to, A, not waste time, but B, get a sense of what the problems actually are. Because if the problems actually are, oh, well, you know, the Kardashians are just too expensive, then there really isn't a solution for that. Well, actually, there is an AI solution for that. And you just have to license the image and then build a bot that can simulate a Kardashian. But short of that.
Which we are not doing, by the way, for the record. Trust Insights does not do that.
for multiple reasons.
For multiple reasons.
But yeah, so we'll look for that. I guess any final thoughts about pivoting a solution in search of a problem into something that the market would actually buy?
I think one thing is it's the magic of product marketing is, you know, you've got to get in front of a bunch of people and interview and drill and kind of find out like, okay, here's these things we can do and try and surface what the problems are. You know, it's really up to you to try and connect the dots and get to where their pain is. And if you can spend enough time in front of them, usually you can find the pain pretty quickly. But it's, you know, earning the right to get in front of them. That's the challenge.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, John. And I would also say, if possible, like don't try to quell innovation. I think innovation is an important thing for any company to be doing, but base your innovation on the data that you have. So, you know, maybe you come across like, oh, we don't have a solution for this problem. What could we do about it? Rather than let's build a thing and see if there's a problem for it. So I would definitely encourage you to be innovative, but really stay grounded in the existing data that you already have. And if you don't have a lot of customer feedback, go out and ask for it. You know, ask your customers, ask your community, post something on Twitter and see who responds. But that would be my hard and fast, like, don't do solutions in search of a problem. It's always more difficult. It's always more expensive. And it's a pain in the butt for us product marketers.
All right. Well, I shall retreat to my lair then and hide for the rest of the day. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.